Okay, recording started. So please uh, take us away, Larry. You have the controls.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. I appreciate that. Before I get started, let me make sure I can share my screen and get things all straightened away here. I'm assuming you can see my screen now. Yeah, looks like it. Um, one, thank you for the introduction. I know quite a few. I'm looking over here because I got another monitor. I'm looking at the participants. We got looks like we got 17 people, and I think I know about half of the folks in here. And which means that half the folks in here probably know me, and some of them are familiar with the work that I've done with job hackers, which is what Sasha was talking about ahead of time. Some of you might have actually taken Peter Zimmer, I know, has taken job hackers. Some of you might have taken it as well. I stepped away about a year ago after doing, I forget how many classes, about 30 classes of job hackers over about 7 years and 5 years of running a nonprofit. But the job hackers is still going. I think they're in a class cycle right now. 4 times a year, they provide free Agile and Scrum training to the unemployed to help people get certified and find work. And they're still going strong. During my time, I personally trained over 4,000 people in over 50 countries, giving away over $6 million worth of training, all on a budget of about $10,000 a month, if you can, or $10,000 a year, sorry, if you can imagine. So some of the stuff, some of you have taken it, and some of you are probably familiar with what I'm going to talk about today because you've taken the class, but you're here anyway. So I thank you for your support. The presentation I'm going to give today, it's called Apke's Golden Rule of Agile, a focus on value delivery, which is the title of my 3rd book. So I wrote 3 books. It's not a big deal, but I was working with T-Mobile, and then I was brought up by the chief digital officer at T-Mobile, and he had some political struggles and got ousted. And so I thought it was time for me to get out of T-Mobile. And when I got out of T-Mobile, first thing I did is said, hey, I got these ideas in my head. Let me write a book. And so that was the 3rd book. So if you bought the book, great. I appreciate it. But when we get to the end, I'm going to show you a barcode. You can download it for free. Some of you might be interested, but I'm going to cover most of the stuff that's in the book in this presentation. So I bandy out the word now. I call myself a VUCA consultant. VUCA, for those of you who don't know, stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It describes the world that we're in. This actually come to us from the acronym generating machine called the United States military. They were the first to use the term VUCA, as far as I know, to describe the way the world is changing. All of you folks are familiar with AI and all the changes that are making. The world continues to get more VUCA. And the reason I'm using that term, and I'm sure a lot of you in this Agile practitioners group have understood that over the years, Agile has changed in its perception to the rest of the world. So I don't necessarily lead with I'm an Agile coach these days, because Agile itself has been, my opinion, more concerned sometimes with frameworks than with the agility, which is the whole reason we're here in the first place. So I want to talk first about the story behind the golden rule. And those of you, there's 17 people. I got like 5 cameras on, including myself. Those of you who can't turn your cameras on, as Bernie said, that's great. I'd love for you to do that. I'm actually working with you all, and the rest of you have come along for the ride. The thing I want to say is how many people, show of hands, are familiar with the Christian tradition and the golden rule and the story behind the golden rule? Some of you are probably familiar with that, right? For those of you who might not be, I'm going to give you my condensed version of it. Please don't give me too much grief for it. If I die, I'll have to meet my maker and explain myself anyway, so you don't have to do it today. Basically, what happened is Moses came down from, I think it was Mount Sinai, and he said, hey, I've got these 10 rules that you all need to follow. And they were called the 10 Commandments. And unfortunately, human beings being what we are, we have kind of a short-term memory of 7 plus or minus 2. So some of them kind of got lost along the way, and we didn't do a very good job with them. So later on in the Bible, there's a story about how Jesus came down and he said to folks, "Hey, I'm going to make it simpler for you because these 10 are probably too much for you as humans. I'm going to give you really two." And the first one is not the one I'm most concerned with. It's, if I remember correctly from my days of Sunday school, it's have no God above me as God. And the second one is the one that is sometimes referred to as the golden rule. And actually, it's present in almost all religions across the world. I've studied most major religions, and they have this concept of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that was termed the golden rule. And I thought, that's pretty cool, right? And that's going through my head one day. And I'm also thinking to myself, there are 4 values and 12 principles. So that's more than 10. That's 16. And those of you who are keeping track at home, some of you are familiar. The first book that I wrote I wrote a series of blog posts on the 4 values and 12 principles. So 16 blog posts, stuck them in a book, called it Agile Manifesto, a brief and bold guide, blah, blah, blah. Some of you might have read it or seen it. It's actually going to celebrate its 10th birthday in June this year. So I'm thinking to myself, if I'm ever in a point where I have to explain agility, and I'm a big believer in the 4 values and 12 principles, and I got to explain it to somebody, that's a little bit too much. In fact, I was doing a podcast the other day, and as much as I should know, I forgot one of the values. I just kind of, popped out of my head. So why don't we, what could I come up with something similar to the golden rule where we can encapsulate all 4 values and 12 principles? And the answer is you can't. But I came up with something and I tested it. And this is how you test things in the world. If you have an idea and you want to test things in the world, go to LinkedIn, go to Facebook, go to social media and post it. Because if it's not, even if it's good, you're probably going to get some response, right? There's a lot of people out there going to say, hey, this is crap. What are you doing? This is sacrilegious, whatever, right? So that's what I did. I figured I'll put it out there. I'll float it out as a balloon. I'll say, hey, what happens? Is anybody going to give me too much grief? Nope, didn't get that much grief. That's a good sign. Means that maybe I was onto something. So I started using it in my training. And this is what I came up with, by the way, which I referred to as Apke's Golden Rule of Agile. And it's not because I have a huge ego that I call it Apke's Golden Rule of Agile. I had a little bit of a tussle in my own mind of whether I should put my name in this or not. My fear was if I just called it the Golden Rule of Agile, there'd be people out there who would think that this is actually the thing and not my thing. So eventually I put my name in it. Helps with branding anyway. Here it is, very simply. We deliver the optimal value to our customers in the shortest time possible, or the shortest possible time, right? And I thought that does a pretty good job of encapsulating. I've been doing this for a few years. I've worked at some companies, some of you know me. I've been out and it seemed like a pretty decent thing. And so I started using it. And when I started using it, I didn't get a whole lot of pushback. Maybe some of you want to push back tonight. That's great. Love to hear it. But I didn't get a lot of pushback, and I found it to be useful. It's not perfect. I'm not going to say it's perfect, and I'm not going to say that we couldn't come up with a whole bunch of different variations or different ones, and it's certainly not perfect, but it was useful in my training. And the reason it was useful is if we take this simple phrase, commit it to memory, there's only 3 things we need to know in order to be successful. And these, I would think, are the 3 most important things. And I put them in bold and italicized them. We need to know value. We need to know who our customers are and what they value. And we need to know how long it takes to deliver value, right? That to me was super, super useful. And it intersected with a lot of stuff that other folks were doing in the world of Agile and things that I was teaching for years, because I didn't come up with this until, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago now. Again, useful. So I asked myself the question, in this talk, I'm going to talk about value and time. I'm not going to talk about customers. That's a different topic. But let's just assume that we know who our customers are and we have a general idea of what they value. There's a simple way, therefore, that we can actually take this rule and apply it. I want to get practical. A lot of people say, Larry, your training's not practical. I'm going to get practical, a little practical tonight. Right? I'm going to show you a technique. Some of you are familiar with this. I got to backtrack a little bit. How many people are familiar with story points? How many people hate story points? Most of them. There's this whole movement out there called no points. And if any of you follow me on LinkedIn, I always keep telling myself I'm not going to take the bait when anybody says we don't use points anymore. But I do, because I can't help myself. It's like catnip. So we don't use points anymore. And I ask myself, I don't think you understand why we do this. And I think that the vast majority of people, maybe not you people, because you're good looking and intelligent, but the vast majority of people in this agile world don't understand what they can be used for. So I don't like to use the word wrong. I like to use the word optimal. I like to use better, right? Because I don't think in this VUCA world there is any real right or wrong. So when I use the word, when I say story points, you're using them wrong. I'm doing that to be provocative. Because Lord knows there's enough people. I don't know if you spend as much time on LinkedIn like me, you probably shouldn't. You probably have a real life. But there's enough people out there posting on story points as if they know what they're used for. And most of the time, I don't think they do. This is my opinion. See, it's about time. So I'm gonna ask you a question. I asked the same question to my class. So Peter and some of the folks are familiar with this question. Give me somebody put up a hand and become a volunteer. So who wants to be my guinea pig? No one? Joe's gonna be my guinea pig. Joe, I appreciate it. I think you can come off mute, Joe. I'm gonna ask you a series of questions, and then I think I know the answers to these questions, but maybe I'm wrong. I've been doing this a while. So Joe, I'm assuming you have a car.
I do.
Okay, that's good. I had one time where somebody didn't have a car. That was a problem. You have a car. I'm assuming that every once in a while that car will break down. Something will happen to it. Does that happen every once in a while, or no? You have a good car?
It hasn't yet.
It hasn't yet. Okay, but you've owned cars in the past. You seem to be a seasoned veteran. You probably owned cars in the past that have needed.
Oh,
and
yeah.
when you do you do those repairs yourself, or do you take it into somebody?
It depends on the complexity.
Okay, so sometimes you take it into somebody. So we'll just go with that. So far we're doing good. When you take it into somebody, you're going to ask them potentially 3 questions. I'm concerned about 2 of them, but you might ask 3. And if you ask 3 of them, I'm going to tell you what you do for a living. What are the 2 or 3 questions that you're going to ask that person that you take your car into?
Well, what is actually wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How much is going to cost? And when will it be ready?
Okay. So the last 2 are the ones I'm worried. Are you by chance an engineer by trade?
Physicist.
Physicist. See,
well, by education, physicist.
Okay. Here's how I knew it, because you asked what's wrong. What normal human beings like myself, I don't know anything about automobiles. I say, how much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Why do I ask those questions, Joe?
You're going to want to know if you're going to want to do it.
Yeah, I'm going to want to know if I want to do it. Do I have to sell a kidney? Right? Do I have to rent a car? I need to do it so I can plan the future. Right? It's all about planning. Okay, so Joe, thank you for your help with that. You said the same thing that everybody said. See, I could write down those questions like Karnak. I just never do it because I'm lazy. But I could do it because everybody has the same 3 questions. Now, if I am somebody who's a product owner and I've been given money to build and make changes to a product, right? Because that's what we're talking about. And I have another talk about projects versus products, but that's not this one. I have a product backlog, right? What do business people ask us? They ask us, how much is it going to cost me? And when do I get it? Now, it seems fair to me. Maybe I'm delusional. In fact, I know I'm delusional. These things are probably mutually exclusive, so it doesn't matter. But it seems to me that if I can ask those questions about my car, because it affects me personally, I should be able to ask the same questions about my product if I run a business. So this is why I don't like people saying, "Hey, we don't use story points. We're no story points. Forget about it." You have to be able to give me some kind of idea of what the future looks like. If the guy at the service station, wherever you take your car, the mechanic says it's going to be X number of dollars, X number of days, is it always X number of dollars, X number of days? No, but it allows me to plan, because if not, I'm kind of, I don't know what word I want to use in polite company here, right? Here's the thing. Story points is about time. It's about the time we deliver something. And agility itself is about delivering small pieces iteratively. I'm preaching to the choir here. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong. You can speak up. You won't offend me. Waterfall was always built around scope and date. Agility should be about value. Should be. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Therefore, in order to follow the golden rule, the one that I told you is useful, though not perfect, we need to know both time and value of the work so that we can figure out what can be done as quickly as possible, and then we sequence the work in such a manner. And I'm going to use that term, sequence. I want that to be, if there's one thing I do before I die, I want that to be a term that we use in Agile that I don't hear very often. I hear rank order, I hear priority, I hear other things. I want to talk about sequence, because sequence is going to be very important. It's very important to this talk. So maybe I'll convince you by the end of it, maybe I won't. The problem is teams fail to assess the time, the relative time. I'm going to talk about relative. We're going to do a relative exercise. That's the fun part. If you said, I'm waiting for the fun part, that's it, right? Until we get into story refinement, sometimes they don't do it until sprint planning. You're using it wrong. You're using it to try to measure a velocity. Nothing wrong with that. But what you're forgetting is, what should I do? You should do those things. I'm gonna give you the punchline, that have the highest value and the shortest amount of effort. So if I'm assessing effort that late in the game, I am missing the point of using relative story points. And I'd say 90% or more of the folks out there using story points are using them wrong. It doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. It means we should understand how they can be used to help us sequence the work properly. Way before sprint planning. When I work with a team, now most of you are like coaches or scrum masters. When I work with a team, and I do that on a regular basis, and I look at their backlog, one of the things I'm looking at to determine the fitness of the backlog is I'm going to look and say, how many of these items on this backlog have a notion of relative value, and how many of these items have a notion of relative effort? And how quickly are we applying those? Because the answer is, it should be ASAP, right? Because if I don't know the value and effort, how do I know the sequence? I don't know what I should do next, basically. So I think everyone is using it incorrectly. That's my take. And the reason that this is and very few teams assess value at all, relative value. When I talk about assessing relative value of stuff on your backlog, sometimes I get blank stares. How do you know what you should do? Guess? Great. You can do it that way. Nobody's going to stop you. Is it the optimal way? No, because what's going to happen is we fall victim to cost and delay and opportunity cost issues, because we're not doing the most valuable thing that can be done in the shortest amount of time. Very simple. Apke's golden rule, right? So there's a simple, effective, and fun way to assess value and effort through a relative estimation exercise. Some of you have done this before, so this would probably be hopefully repeat for some of you. The take home is, don't just do it for effort, and don't do it late in the game. Do it as quickly as possible, right? I've done this literally hundreds of times. I've done it in class, I don't know, 50, 60 times at least. And I do it with every team I work with. In fact, I have the luxury now, since I've been doing this for a few years, when I worked at one place, I told the team, I said, we're gonna do this. Are you comfortable with doing this? And they said, no. And I said, I'm not going to be the person you're gonna work with. Go work with somebody else. I'll help you find someone else. This is what I do, right? Because it makes sense, and hopefully it will make sense when I'm done talking today, and that's relative estimation. So here's what I want to do. I've got an exercise that I do in my class. Some of you are familiar with it, so if you've done it in the class before, you sit on your hands. But I want to get like maybe 2 or 3 volunteers who know something about home improvement. Okay, so if somebody raise a hand or something, if not, I'm going to call on you because I can see a few of you. I don't want to punish you for turning your cameras on, but who knows about home improvements? See, I got Joe. Joe, you're the best. I appreciate it. I got Sasha's going to do it. He hasn't done it. I don't think you've done this with me before, have you?
Nah, no, I'm
Okay.
eager to learn.
Okay, I need one more. Somebody who knows about the David. Okay, all right. Where's the females? No females want to help. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I copied this link. I could put it in the chat. Now those of you who I've identified, you're the folks who are going to help me out. The rest of you, sit on your hands and don't mess with it. I'm gonna put it in the meeting chat here. And if you click on that link, I'm hoping you can join me on this board that I have. That is my hope.
Yep.
Okay, I see some people are starting to join. Rest of you, I want you to pay attention. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to them, but I talk a lot to occupational hazard. I get paid by the word. Okay, so those of you that I called out who are helping out, if you'll notice on the left-hand side, there's a line here and there's a bunch of items here. And this is a honey-do list, by the way. If you don't know what a honey-do list is, it's when your honey says to you, honey, do this, honey, do that. And this is a honey-do list from back in Arizona where I used to live a long time ago. My wife, my honey, gave me a list of things that she wanted done around the house. So you can use it for anything, right? You've got a backlog of stuff. You can use it for anything. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk only about effort, okay? Because I think that's easier. We're going to talk about effort with you guys, what things are. So here's the rules. This is what I'll go through, and I have this whole thing, but we'll just go through it together. I can take any 2 of these items and I can ask a very simple question. I can take any 2 at random, just like a magic trick. I always say I'm going to pick any 2, pick a card, any card. So I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to grab this one. And I'm going to bring them on the board here. And so I'm going to ask the group that is supposed to help me. There's 2 things: install gutters and trim the tree in the backyard. One takes more effort than the other. Which one takes more effort than the other one?
I would probably
Installing gutters.
gutters.
Yeah, the gutters. I think everybody knows that. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go left to right like we read. On the left-hand side, less effort. On the right-hand side, more effort. Now, it's pretty simple. When we get done, what we're going to do is we're going to have the least effort stuff on the left, most effort stuff on the right. I can grab a third one just for fun. Install crown molding. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's a few places it can be. All right, and then you can help me out. It can be less than this one. It could be about the same. It could be in the middle. It could be about the same as this one, or it could be to the right. Where does it belong? Anyone?
I'm going to put it about the same as the gutters.
Okay, so I'm going to put it underneath the gutters because it's about the same. You see how this works, right? You with me? Now, the folks that I've identified who are going to work this is what you're going to do. I want you to grab one, move it somewhere so it's yours and you know it. Ask yourself the question, do I know where it belongs in terms of effort? If you do, place it on the screen. If you don't, put it back. Somebody else will get it. Grab another one. You with me? And we don't need to talk about it. You can do it very quickly. All I want to know, is it less effort, about the same effort as something else, in between others, etc. All right? And while they're doing that, I want you to think somebody's trying to create, don't create new ones. I got enough work to do here. Can you grab those and start moving them, or we're not working? I think you can. I'm hoping you can.
Do you want to establish a certain order within the team?
No, I don't want to order. You just go grab them. Like
Yes.
here, this, I'm gonna say it goes here. That's all that's all you gotta do. You guys just grab them. Just grab and go. If you're part of the thing, grab them and go. Don't overthink it, because, you know, we do have a time limit today. Less effort on the left, more effort on the right.
I don't have access to move.
You don't have
That's what I
access
was
to
gonna say.
move,
Yes.
but when I did this, it says anyone can edit and,
No,
oh,
it came up,
Send your
it says
request.
view only.
okay, what do I need to do here? Oh, can view, can no access? Well, okay, well, that don't help any. All right. This is the fun of not working with Mural for the last whatever months. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna explain what's gonna happen. People are gonna start taking these and they're gonna start putting them in different areas until we have them all on the board. So what I'm gonna show you is I'm gonna show you a different board. Ta-da! Thanks for volunteering, guys. I appreciate it anyway. Your work is done. Look at that. This is from a different group. Notice how we brought these out onto the screen, and what we're going to do is I'm going to work with the teams to put them in groups, and we're going to put numbers to those groups. It's more fun when and more revealing when I can show you how it works, but I think you're smart people, you get how it works. I'm going to go through a series of different asking questions. And sometimes there'll be stuff like in the middle, and I'll say, hey, should I move that left or right? But what I'm really looking for is I'm looking for 9 or fewer columns. Anybody want to know why I use 9 or fewer columns, by the way? Does that correspond to anything that we know? No? It's
7 plus minus 2.
It's a modified Fibonacci sequence that we usually use. So what I'm going to try to do in this particular example, what I did with somebody else, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think 8. Did I count right? I ran out of fingers and toes. I have 8. And you'll notice at the top, I can start to give them numbers. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40. Right? Really simple. Now I want you to imagine that when new work comes into this backlog, what do? Well, somebody give me something, since I'm the only one who seems to be able to do anything here on this. If I put a new sticky note, I gotta fix the washing machine, right? All I have to ask is I put it over here. I spelled it wrong, but I put it over here on the left, and I ask a question. What does this look like in terms of relative effort? And then I put it in that column. Let's say I put it in this column. This columns are 20s. How quickly can I get the quote unquote story points for this? You with me? Like that. And if I'm doing Scrum with my team, we're going to do this during refinement. So during refinement, which happens at the beginning of the sprint, we're going to sit down and we're going to say, here's all the new stuff on our backlog, and we're going to put it on the left-hand side, and we're going to move it to the right, and we're going to get those estimates. Who do we do these estimates with, by the way, for effort?
The developers.
We do it with the developers, the people who understand the effort. Okay, that's one group of people, right? But I said I need to know 2 things. I need to know also relative value. Now, what I want you to imagine, because again, not only good looking, but smart people on this call. I'm going to take a different group of people. I'm going to go to my product owner, and I'm going to say, I want you to grab people who know about the value of the work on this backlog. And we're going to get into a virtual room together. We're going to put this mural thing together, and I'm going to actually do it so that people have access to it. And I'm going to ask a different question. Instead of the relative effort that it would take to do the work, I'm going to ask, if I did the work today, if I delivered this work today, what's the relative value of it? And you can imagine that I'm going to have the same thing, the least value on the left and the most value on the right. You with me so far? And now I have two numbers. I have a relative number for value. I'm going to close that out. I have a relative value for number, relative number value for effort, and one for value. I have those two things, right? And now I'm cooking because I have two of the three things I need to know. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I think. I'm going to try to. Oh, there we go. So this is an example of an actual, relative value and effort exercise I did with a group. I don't know how it was, years and years ago. And you'll notice that I've used a very fancy tool called Excel. Now, if you're cheap, you can use Google Sheets. Right? You with me? This is the problem. I mean, we get so wound up in our tools, we think we're going to say, but the best tool is sometimes actually Excel, believe it or not. So in Excel, what I did is I have the type. Notice that on the cards, there wasn't a lot of information. And you know why there's not a lot of information? Because it's easier. Because in our brains, Bernie was talking about our brains. I talk a lot about in my training about our brains. We're really good at relative stuff. Something bigger than something bigger than others, something more valuable than others. So I don't have a lot of information, but I can still do it. And I can do it quickly. In fact, the record is 140 stories in an hour. That's how quickly you can go through it, right? So it's quick, it's easy, it's fun. And now we have two valuable pieces of information. So I put in two columns here to the right, value and effort. And then I have this third column that I've added, which is the value to effort ratio. Guess what? The higher the number, the sooner I should do it. So what I can do is I can do a reverse sort in Excel. I know that's probably advanced for some of you folks. I'm teasing. Of course, you can do this, right? This is what they do when they lay you off anyway. They do a reverse sort on your salary, and then if you're at the top, then you get laid off. No, that probably doesn't work that way, but it's close. You do a reverse sort. And what I refer to this in the book, and what I refer to this when I'm talking with teams, is I'm going to refer to this as the ideal sequence. Because mathematically, if I were to deliver the things in this sequence, I would deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time. You with me? And I want you to understand the agility of this, because when you do other types of management, backlog management, there's a high cost to change. Waterfall has the highest cost to change because if we want to make a change, we actually have to go to a change review board and all kinds of nonsense, right? And I always tell people, I'd rather get a root canal than go to a change review board. We want to make a change to this. All we have to do is change the sequence. We put something on the backlog, we assess the relative value and effort, and we change the sequence. When we change the sequence, we're actually changing the schedule. Now, this is the ideal sequence. This is where I start with every one of my teams. Guess what? By a show of hands, how many people live in an ideal world? Right? I've been doing this for years. I keep asking. Nobody's raised a hand yet, but when somebody does, I want to be that person's friend. We do not live in the ideal world. We live in a world of constraints. So the next thing I do is once I have the ideal sequence, and this goes back to systems thinking, by the way, if you're familiar with Russ Ackoff, he says we have to understand what we could do without constraints before we can understand, anything. So this is without constraints. Now we have to factor in the systemic constraints. And what are the systemic constraints that we have in our system? Well, there's going to be a few. And the major ones are going to be dependencies. One thing on this list is dependent on others. I refer to it as a systemic constraint. The reason it's a constraint, it doesn't allow me to deliver the most value I could, ultimately. I have other constraints. I have temporal constraints. I have management constraints, right? The HIPPO method. Everybody knows the HIPPO method. Highest paid person's opinion, right? I have all these constraints. I need to factor those in next. So let me give you an example. which I always use. Number 2 on my list, very high in terms of value to effort ratio. I don't know why it came out this way. Don't question it, just understand it's number 2. It says insulate the Arizona room. For those of you who don't know what an Arizona room is, it's a sun room, but we have so much sun in Arizona, we just call it an Arizona room. Right? Insulating the Arizona room, great. But I also have something below that says rewire the Arizona room. Now, do I want to insulate the Arizona room and then rewire it second? No, doesn't make sense. I want to rewire before I insulate, right? So those I would flip in terms of sequence. And that would change it. So I would probably move insulate the Arizona room down below, rewire the Arizona room. So now I am no longer in the ideal sequence. I'm factoring in constraints. Another constraint, temporal. Arizona is hot. At least my part of Arizona. I lived in Scottsdale for 25 years. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's hot. And it's getting hotter. I moved away about a decade ago. We would have about 10 days of the year that would be 110 plus. I think last year they had 20 something. Now, you're not going to do any work in an Arizona room during the summer. So if I'm looking at this list, I might have to factor that in there. Yes? And there's other things I'll factor in. But again, I start with the ideal and then I factor in any constraints. And then when I'm done, and this is probably something I should have put in the golden rule, but I already published the darn book, is I want to deliver the optimal value in the shortest possible time given my constraints. Because what I will have is I will have a sequence of things that I will do that follow that rule. Meaning, assuming, which we have to make the assumption, that my initial estimates were right, which we know they don't have to be, and we can reassess them anytime because we do it so quickly. But I am now delivering the highest possible value in the shortest time given my constraints. I can guarantee you, if you're working with teams, they're probably not doing that unless they're doing this exercise, right? I know when I started working with product owners to start doing that assessment of relative value, you could see the light bulbs going off. And when I factored in the effort so that they knew, because sometimes the product owner doesn't know the effort. So when you factor those two things together, now I have a real good sequence. And it is about sequence. And the reason it is remember we started with Joe and his cars, talking about when do I get it and how much does it cost, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's the thing about using sequence. I can start to actually track something called velocity, which is the flow of things through a system. And I can measure the flow of either the items themselves, which some people do, or I can measure the flow of the points through the system, which is sometimes called velocity. Now I can use points for how everybody else is using points. Yes? And your schedule, if somebody comes and said, what's your schedule look like? Well, your schedule is really your sequence plus your velocity. Does that make sense? So once I've done all this pre-work, all this refinement of my backlog, I can start to show what the future looks like. I can do it by the number of stories. Let's say I do 10 stories per sprint. I could go down 10, say here's sprint 1, here's sprint 2, here's sprint 3. And because sprints are tied to time, I can now start to say by date. Now, am I promising that those things are going to happen? Absolutely not. What I'm showing is what I'm capable of doing over time, just like the mechanic will do if you have a good mechanic. And a good mechanic is worth their weight in gold. In fact, if you have one, drop me a note. Right? This is your velocity. And as teams stabilize, what I found is if you don't game the system, if you use this relative estimation, people stop gaming the system, what you'll find is your velocity starts to even out. It won't flatline, but it will start to even out. And that means I've become predictable. And that's what the business is looking for from you, by the way. Can you be predictable about the future? And that's the problem with no points. Well, I can be predictable if we just count the stories. Well, here's the problem with just counting the stories. Because how have you chosen which ones to do? Right? And then somebody will come back and they'll say, well, what we do is we make sure all the stories are the same size. That's premature optimization. It's waste in lean. Lean would call that waste. It's muda. Why would I prematurely optimize stories that I'm not going to do for a long time just so I can count stories instead of story points? It's ludicrous to me. Sorry. I hope I don't offend anybody. And once I start doing this, I always tell people if I want to know schedule, velocity plus sequence equals schedule. It's not it's a version of scheduling, right? Or you can call it the roadmap. Somebody said, what's my roadmap? You can do it. You can do it with stories. You can do it with features. You can do it with initiatives. You can do it with anything that you can put in a backlog. I just showed you. It doesn't matter what the backlog is, as long as you use relativity and you use sequencing. If you want to change the schedule, what do? Change the sequence. Because you're not going to change the velocity, right? We all know that. The only way you're going to change the velocity of a team is you're going to have to make a systemic change to the team, right? You can add people to it, but when you add people to it, your velocity is going to go down for a while, right? But I can start to show the business what it looks like. So this is what it looks like. So in my example, I've had 8 prior sprints, and I figured out what my velocity is, and I could start to count down. I forget what it is. It's like what, 5, 12, 10, 14, 16 or something. I can count down and I can say, okay, based on the sequence of the work today, I can deliver these things potentially in sprint 9, these things, oops, I'm going the wrong way. These things potentially in sprint 10, 11, 12, and I can do it for the entire list. Why? Because I have taken the entire list of things and made sure that the sequence was N, 1 to N. This is now a roadmap. Now I can start giving the business the kind of feedback that they're looking for so they can make intelligent decisions while maintaining the ability to be agile. Why? Because you can add something to it at any time. Because once you add something to it, I'm going to do an assessment of value, effort, and I'm going to sequence it. And unless it's the number one thing in the list or the last thing on the list, it's going to go in between 2 stories somewhere. And when I put that in there, the rest of the stories flow down. And what happens to their schedule? Their schedule changes. So I can change the schedule at any time. That is the hallmark of agility, right? This is a practical way of actually taking Apke's golden rule of Agile and applying it to real world. The other thing that it helps us with doing this exercise, and I'll have time for questions and comments. I think I'm doing all right on time, right? I'm about 5 minutes over, I think. Relative size and value also help us determine the work that is too large and needs to be broken down, right? If I have a 40-point piece of work and my velocity is 20, it's too big. In fact, the thing that I'm really looking for when I'm doing this exercise, I'm looking for the things with high value and high effort. Because they're going to have a bad ratio and they're going to be way down the list. But what it's telling me is I've got a bunch of value stuck in this big glob of stuff. And if I just break down this big glob of stuff into pieces and reassess the value and effort of each piece, guess what's going to happen? The value that was hidden in that big glob of stuff is going to move up to the top. And the other stuff that I don't need, it's going to move down to the bottom. So it helps us determine what we need to break into smaller pieces. And it helps us then to take those pieces, reassess, and resequence. It allows us to concentrate and reduce WIP. It allows us to focus. This is the thing that really kills us in the world, is the concept of being able to focus our effort. I had a nice lunch meeting today with somebody who was talking about a client of theirs whose budget for people has increased 3 times, and they've hired 3 times as many people. And they went back 5 years when they had 1/3 the number of people, and they looked at how long it took them to deliver things. And the 3 times more people takes 3 times longer to deliver. Why? Because I'm not concentrating, I'm not focusing my effort. So this allows us to focus on those things that are coming up next. And we can ignore, to a certain extent, those things that are not, because we'll get to them just in time. So if I can focus only that thing, I can make quicker and better decisions. And that's what it is. I'm giving a talk tomorrow. I do a live show every Friday. Some of you have joined it before, and I've invited you, and you haven't joined it. But regardless, I'm going to talk about decisioning, because that's true agility. When you look at the core of agility, it's the ability to make quick decisions. And when you look at bureaucracy, it's the opposite. So focus allows us to make better decisions, allows us to make quicker decisions. It tells us what things do I need to refine. So there's two-step process. When I'm talking about refinement, there's two things that are in refinement. And they used to call them out in Scrum. They don't call it anymore. There's the backlog itself. So everything I've talked about up to this point, I'm going to refer to as backlog refinement. Once I've refined the backlog and put it into sequence, now I can go into detail about the stuff that's at the top of the list. And I'm going to refer to that as product backlog item refinement. That's when I go and say, okay, I haven't talked about this thing much. Let's talk about it. Let's get some detail. Let's put some acceptance criteria. If I do this technique, I'm only going to concentrate on putting acceptance criteria on the things that I need to, and the other things can wait until later. Okay, so that's really, really important, because then I'm not trying to put acceptance criteria on everything. I've seen that happen, right? And here's the real kicker. If you've never thought about it before, and you've worked with teams, and you all have done this before, what matters to humans and what engages people in their work is knowing the value they create, not the effort they put in, right? I mean, we can be proud that we've worked hard, but we're more engaged when we talk about the value that we deliver. What is the value I deliver as a team? Well, one of the things that you can start doing when you actually start assessing value and using it to sequence the work is you can actually talk about something that I refer to as value velocity. Wouldn't it be so much better to talk about the value velocity of a team than the effort velocity of a team? Right? And I can show it. I can show the team and say, look at the value you delivered. We've done all this work, but we've done the stuff that matters to our customer. So there are just so many benefits, which is why I keep going back to Apke's golden rule of Agile is not perfect, but it's useful. Because once we start using it, we can start making these judgments and assessments to help us actually ensure that we're delivering the most value to our customers in the shortest possible time. Those of you who have not gotten the book and are interested in getting the book, you can get it for free. There is a QR code here. You can point your fancy phones to it. And all you need to do is you put in your name and your email, and boom, just like that. It's going to send you a PDF digital copy of it. I will have your information in my database. I promise that I will not spam you. I will send you reminders of Relentless Learning, which we do every Friday. And if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe immediately. But maybe you'll be interested in joining us for some of the Relentless Learning stuff that we do on Fridays. I'm just gonna put that plug in there tomorrow at noon, most Fridays at noon. And so with that said, I've used up most of my time and want to go back for any questions that folks might have. Is there anything in chat? I'm looking at chat here.
I have one question. Good stuff, Larry. When I look at like your spreadsheet and you have everything in order by sprints, and you can see your sprints and you can plan your sprints ahead. The thing I think of nowadays is that how do you avoid getting caught in the trap of having a feature factory? In other words, just cranking out things to get done. Now, the value is important. I understand that. But I'm kind of exploring the idea based on this book called Driving Value with Sprint Goals of the value of sprint goals. So when you look at what you have on the screen there, I would hope that the high value of sprint 9 and then 10 and 11, the team can, with the help of the product owner, define valuable sprint goals?
So it's interesting you bring that up, and I'm going to respond. And if I don't do a good job, Andy, you come back with it and redirect it. One, I'm going to say I am not the best Scrum person in the world when it comes to sprint goals. And I'll tell you why. I'm just going to give you my perception. I don't think they should be separate from the work. I think the work should speak for itself. I think the work that you choose during sprint planning should reflect the goals as you understand them. So it is implicit in that. And I don't think I need to have a separate sprint goal. My opinion. Might be heresy for some. Second thing, I think what you're getting to, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is you're getting to when you talk about feature factory, what we're saying is, are we taking this project approach to a product? Which means this, am I just making sure that I'm making changes to the software, adding new features, removing features, et cetera, right? Which is what projects are generally, right? And I'm going to say, if you do this, here's what I tell teams. One, it's not a project, it's a product. So this is a product backlog. And a team, I think I mentioned at T-Mobile, if I didn't mention it, we went from project-based funding to product-based funding for over $1 billion worth of spend in 7 months, which I believe is the largest and fastest of its kind. I know companies that are much smaller that have tried for years to move from project to product. The reason that you want to do it, as I say, is a project is like a rental car. No one washes a rental car. You don't own it. And you will become a feature factory, because all the projects are going to do is projects are going to spit features onto your backlog. But if you have true product funding and true product ownership, you're going to put other things on your backlog. You're going to put, for lack of better words, you're going to put in technical debt, CI/CD, et cetera, right? Because again, what you're looking at is you're looking at value. So if the analogy I use is this, let's say that you have a whole bunch of valuable stuff in a warehouse, but you only have one truck and it goes down a 1-lane road. What's the first thing you're going to do? Right? If you own that business, you're going to buy more trucks. You're going to do something about creating maybe a 2-lane road, 3-lane. That's CI/CD, right? You're going to create those pipelines. The reason you're not creating pipelines is you're taking a project mentality into a product world in software. So anything that you look at this is just a honey-do list. But if this was actual software, I'd have features, and within those features, I'd have defects, and within those, with the defects, I would have technical debt related issues or CI/CD, and all those things would have to compete with the other things in terms of relative value and effort. And a good product owner would understand the value of creating a bigger highway than just trying to create a whole bunch of features and shove them down the road.
Yeah. I put the link for the book in the chat there. And I really like the book. I highly recommend it. And the author sets up the topic of sprint goals in an elaborate fashion of talking about the complex nature of building software products, which is the VUCA end of it.
Right.
And acknowledging that there is, because of that complexity, there is learning to be done. There is discovery to be done.
Absolutely.
And having what he calls humble plans, or sprint goals in the form of humble plans, is because of that.
Yeah.
Very interesting angle to look at it from. I always find myself doing what you have on the screen here and then trying to manufacture a sprint goal from that.
Right.
Myself, I'm a Scrum Master, I'm a coach, I'm not a product person, and that felt very awkward. So this book gave me some ideas to coach a product person along these lines.
Yeah, whatever works for you, right? I mean, if it works for you, that's great. I just, again, I always thought the goals should be implicit in the work that we choose. There's all kinds of things that people do. I know Joe's got his hand up, but briefly, there's all kinds of things that people do to try not to be a feature factory. I think the best thing you can do is not be a project centric, have project centric incentives. If you do, you're going to end up being a feature factory, even if you don't try, because that's what you're being graded on. What you should be
Yeah,
graded
that-
on is the value of the product you're creating, not the fact that you're creating these features. But the reason that you're creating the features is the features were funded, because what gets funded gets done, right? So when I worked at T-Mobile, what we did is we said we're going to stop doing project funding, which is take a whole bunch of stuff, which is very slow, by the way, because I gotta do all this assessment stuff up front, and the cost delay is tremendous. All we said is, what are you going to invest next year in this product? And basically that investment will determine how many teams you have. And the teams will determine how much you can do. And then the question is, okay, I'm going to do the best thing I can with what I have, as opposed to I'm going to do this particular scope that's been funded. So I don't think, my personal opinion is, I don't think you can get out of being a feature factory if you're living in a project world.
Yeah, and I've lived in that world, and that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Joe's hand up was first, then we got John, who's all the way from Australia. You're staying up late or getting up early or something, aren't you?
Early. It's 11:30 in the morning.
Okay, well, I'll get to Joe and then we'll talk about Australia. I was just talking to somebody in Australia yesterday. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, how do you suggest tracking value other than the points that you've done through the relative estimating?
That's how I want to track it, because again, I'm going to go back to if there's certain assumptions. One is I'm assuming that it's product-based funding, because really all I'm doing is, if I say, let's say, I think at T-Mobile is like $2 million is what we figured it would take for a team of like 7 ± 2 for a Scrum team. I think that's what it was. And we would say, okay, well, how many teams do we want to put on this? What size of teams? Do we want a smaller team, bigger team, whatever? Let's just say we go with this, I'm going to fund $2 million. Well, the question is, everything, the way I used to explain to the business is, everything is funded now. You don't have to go to business for funding. Everything is funded. The best things will get built. And it becomes, okay, now let's determine what the things are. And that's where the sequence and goes in. So if you're not doing that, it's going to be very difficult. But if you want to track value in hard dollars, which you can do that in other ways outside of this, because I'm not tracking that. You would want to track it, by the way, because you'd want to say, okay, next year, next quarter, whatever my increment is that I'm going to fund this, how much do I want to do? Do I want to do more or less? I did 2 million last year. Do I want to increase the investment because I expect I'm going to get a higher rate of return? Or do I want to decrease the investment because I haven't gotten the return that I expected? It becomes much, much easier. I can actually stop concentrating on the front end of funding, because I can make those determinations very quickly, and I can actually concentrate on the back end of, am I delivering the value, which we don't do because we spend so much time calculating the front end of cost that we spend so little time actually tracking the value that we're creating, right? So that would be the way I would answer it. Everybody just wants to give me a dollar figure. Well, all right. I mean, I can back into that, because I can back into it. If somebody said, well, this was worth $1 billion and I delivered 100 value points, I could determine, how much per value point on the average I delivered, right? I mean, you could. It doesn't matter, because I've decided to invest $2 million. So it doesn't matter necessarily until I make the decision of not investing $2 million, right? So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. It's late in the day. I stopped making sense at a certain point. John?
Morning, everybody. I'm just about to recut a version of this, would you believe, for the 4th time at a program and enterprise level. And the main difference we find, they're in 2 small companies. One's called Marsh McClelland, and the other one's called AIA, massive organizations. And what we're doing there is take your great work, Larry, is actually do this in real time. So having done the first layout, and I could be laying out features over 3, 6, 9 months. I then get a representative team of the technical side and the business side to come together to see, based on empirical data coming up from the Scrum teams, does anything change, like their velocity, which would move things in and out? Is there anything new, as you say? Are there issues with non-functionals? So we want to get ahead of the game And the other criteria this allows us to do, looking quarter +1 +2, gives our suppliers time to come back with a quote.
Yep.
They can't do it at the same time. We got to give them time out here as we catch up with them as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just about, for the second time, about to go into Mercer, part of Marsh McLelland, and do this a second time. But real time really works. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, because you can do it like that, right? That's the point of it, is I can do it quickly and easily, which is what allows me for the agility.
Mm.
The thing that I found most interesting is it takes a lot of effort to get a company to actually do this. I've never gotten to what I want to do as the next step.
Yeah.
And
So-
what I want to do is the next, I'm going to give this one to you guys. So if you get there, bring me along with you. I want to set up futures markets for features, for work.
Yeah.
I honestly do. I want to get to a point where not only I have in the room the business people that come together and assess relative value. I want to put it out there like if nobody's familiar with futures markets, but I would want to do a futures market. How valuable is this feature? Bet on it, like a pari-mutuel betting, and at the end of the quarter, if we actually did that work, you're going to receive money. Tokens, not real money. I think that's a great way to verify what's done in this relative value exercise, is actually create some kind of futures market for it. I've never been able to do it because it takes all my effort just to get people to do this. And I've never gotten to that next step that I wanted. So if anybody ever gets ready for that, bring me along for the ride. I'm relatively expensive. I don't work very hard, but I'm kind of fun to have around. So
Yeah, people from Enron went to jail, remember?
so
Still in bad.
hopefully, John, that helps a little bit.
What we found over time, Larry, because I work for Mercer London in Australia, is that based on these sizings, right, we could actually start to give a template back to the business and technology, saying if it's this sort of size, we could actually then measure. I don't like doing it, but measuring it across the organization.
Yeah.
So the relativity of a 1, it might be 15 million in one division, but it might be 10 million in another, or reduced FTE, but they're equally same value rank.
Yep.
So for each of the futures areas, like soybean versus cash, we could give the same number based on their relative value in each one. So an enterprise, they could look across the board and say, do we want to invest in, olive oil, or do we want to invest in cash?
Right. And so we did something similar at T-Mobile. We just rolled up. So
Yeah.
it goes into the whole scaling stuff, which I don't even want to step in that because I've already on record that I'm not a safe fan, and that always kind of pisses people off. But what we did is, if you look at work, it's hierarchical, right? It starts at the person level or the team level, and what people do are tasks. Tasks generally roll up into stories. Stories roll up into epics. Epic roll up into features, or depending on how you do it, which roll up into initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. And what we did at T-Mobile is we funded at various levels. And then the decision for funding would flow down that very elegantly, meaning I have 5 business units. Each business unit gets X number of dollars. Under each business unit, we had, I forget what we call them, portfolios or something. Each portfolio will be invested in based on what they did over the previous year. So I can do the same thing. I could start to look at initiatives because of the same size and say, okay, who contributed to these initiatives? I want to give those people more money. Or more importantly, what initiatives do I have coming up? And what is the relative value of those initiatives? And how much money should I invest therefore in each of these portfolios? And the portfolio owner would pass it on down to the next thing and determine how many teams. And it was quite elegant. Lord knows what they've done.
And you touched on two key things there. It actually helps drive your layout of the teams or squads for the future year, which might be different to this year. Or
Yep.
three things. Secondly, it's based on return on investment, ROI.
Yep.
And thirdly, although you've not mentioned it too much, the business should own the outcome
Yep.
of technology, not the builders.
Yep.
Because we don't
100%.
know what the value really means in the world. We've got a relative value, but it's up to them to then go and get the dollars and cents coming in from the market or the increased numbers. We
Yep.
can't do that. So
Yep.
ownership by the business is critical.
That's all the stuff that we did before I left T-Mobile, and I helped get it set up. Lord knows where they are now. But that's what we did, and I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. I mean, what we did is said basically, you are the business, you have certain needs. Here's what you're going to receive in terms of funding.
Mm.
It's very easy to do, because
Yeah.
all you got to do is you take your whole spend from the previous year and ask yourself a question: what are we going to spend this year? We're going to spend 10% less, 20% less, 10% more. Okay, good. I've got X number of dollars. I've got 5 places it needs to go. Who gets what?
Yeah.
Right. And then you can do it by who's delivered what, because you have the ability to start actually, to some degree, comparing the value that's delivered from one place to another. So it just, there's just so many ways that you can take it, which is why I keep going back to this little thing that, you know, that is not perfect but useful, which is the goal, Apke's golden rule of Agile. If I start taking that to its logical conclusion, I start coming up with all kinds of different things around it.
Yeah.
All of the things that we're talking about included. Okie doke. Anybody else? Kind of fun, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's-
about 80% of the things going on the backlog where I've been working at, it will be more at the feature level or the mid level. We use ADO boards, so it was like Epic's features store. I mean, yeah, so yeah, we'd add value on there, or basically ranking them. We are also dependent upon product managers and product owners giving you good estimates too on the value. So if you're not talking directly to customers.
Absolutely. I mean, but again, the question is, are they going to make these decisions more in an open forum, or are they going to just kind of hand wave stuff? Now, I'm not saying the hand wavy stuff that we normally do is imperfect. It's not. It's directionally correct. But what I'm not looking for directionally correct. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for optimization.
Yeah. Some of the constraints we had too was not based on a team as well, because we had a set of QAs and set of developers, and sometimes they would get ahead of each other, so we'd have to wait on certain items before we could hit other items, wait for people to catch up, or we'd have the developers work in tech debt or process improvement stuff while we're waiting for the QA people to. We weren't continuous continuous. So.
Well, here's the interesting thing about this, though. Again, I'm just taking all this stuff to some what I would consider logical conclusion. If we start measuring the value delivered, we'll stop doing some of this behavior, right?
Yeah.
Because when you measure effort, what you're saying is, oh, a QA put in this effort and so put in this effort, but what value was delivered? Well, nothing was delivered of value.
Yeah.
So I may want to stop doing what I'm doing, which I refer to sometimes as hyper specialization, which is why, when I had the conversation this afternoon with a person, they said they got 3 times as many people and it takes 3 times as long to deliver anything. We're spending 3 times the amount of money, because what they've done is, instead of having people, who are cross-functional themselves, who can do more than one thing, and having teams that are cross-functional that can deliver from beginning, cradle to grave kind of stuff. Which you would have in a startup or something of that nature. What they've done is they've got different silos, and then they're passing the work among those silos, and they're calling them a team, and they're not really delivering any value. So I got into it one day with what's his name? Mountain Goat. Who's the Mountain Goat guy?
Mike Cohn.
Mike Cohn. Because Mike says, well, do you do it with stories? They're too small. You shouldn't do it. I said, well, sometimes we do it with stories, but it really matters when you talk about the feature level, because feature is generally where value is found. So you can, if your stories are too small to contain value, which is possible, They contain like incremental value for the customer, right? I have to do it in order to deliver value to the customer. But I start to measure the feature value, which is what we did at T-Mobile, was we defined a feature as something that is the smallest piece of recognizable value to the customer. And if I start to track the value velocity of features, I'll stop doing some of the stupid stuff we do. Because what I'll see is I'll see everybody's busy, but the value is actually not moving at all. It's kind of like, I always use the analogy of a bodega, right? You know, the corner shop. What we do with value is kind of like somebody at the bodega taking something from one shelf and moving it from one shelf to another shelf to another shelf to another shelf to another shelf. Who cares? I don't make money until it's delivered. And at the bodega, I don't make money by moving things from one shelf to another. I make money when it's sold. And I have to stop giving credit. This is something that I think in project management, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a project manager PMI person, but I think it was called earned value. We used to do this thing tracking earned value. There's no percentage. You're not earning anything unless you deliver it to your customer. There's no value to the work of moving things from one shelf to another unless it leads to me selling that item, right? And there's no value of moving work from one place to another in the system unless it leads to me delivering more value. So when you start tracking the value as opposed to effort, you start incentivizing the right things, because it's all about incentive.
Yeah, that earned value stuff came out of cost accounting, which
Right.
doesn't even measure revenue. So yeah.
Right. But it makes sense if I'm going to create a system that basically wants to take credit for delivering something that has no real value to the business.
Yeah.
Right. I have to justify my existence now. The best thing you can do is obviously create a cross-functional team that is built around delivering value. Anyway, I think we're probably pretty long on time. Are we still good, Sasha?
Thank you. That's pretty interesting discussion. I would gladly pick it up maybe outside this group, because I'm actually a big believer in this, in the sprint goal. And I also had a long conversation about that with Mike Cohn at some point. So it would be very interesting to pick up this discussion. In the meanwhile, let me stop the recording.